Hello, dear friend. Welcome. I'm so grateful you've chosen to be here tonight. Before we begin our journey together, I invite you to take a moment to settle in completely. Adjust anything that needs adjusting, your pillow, your blanket, your position. And if this story brings you peace, please consider subscribing to our channel and turning on notifications. Your support helps us continue creating these quiet spaces for rest and healing. Now, let go of the day. Whatever happened, whatever didn't happen, whatever you carried with you into this moment, you can set it down now. Just for tonight, just for this hour. It will all be there tomorrow if you need it, but right now you are free to simply rest. Take a deep breath with me. In through your nose, hold it gently, and release through your mouth with a soft sigh. Beautiful. One more time. Breathe in peace, hold it like a treasure, and let it all go. Tonight, I'm going to tell you a story about a gardener named Thomas and a paper boat that changed everything. It's a story about water and earth, memory and release, holding on and letting go. But more than anything, it's a story about finding peace in the gentlest, most unexpected places. You don't need to follow every word. Your mind is welcome to wander like a stream, finding its own path. If you drift away entirely, that's exactly what's meant to happen. So close your eyes now, if you haven't already, and let's walk together into the garden. There was a gardener named Thomas who lived at the edge of a village that most people had forgotten about. The village wasn't sad or abandoned, it was simply quiet, tucked into a fold of hills where time moved differently, where seasons changed slowly, and where people spoke in soft voices as if the world itself was sleeping. Thomas had been the village gardener for longer than anyone could remember. Some said he'd always been there, that he'd grown up from the soil itself like one of his beloved plants. His hands were permanently stained with earth, his nail fingers perpetually outlined in green, and his eyes held the patient wisdom of someone who had watched 1,000 springs arrive and depart. His garden was not like other gardens. It sprawled across 3 acres at the village's edge, bordered on one side by an ancient stone wall and on the other by a stream that sang its way down from the mountains. The garden contained everything: vegetable beds arranged in spirals, fruit trees that had been trained into living sculptures, flower gardens that bloomed in careful succession so that color never entirely faded, and hidden corners where wild things grew untouched, their own small wilderness preserved within cultivation. But the heart of the garden, the place Thomas returned to again and again, was a small pond, fed by the stream. Willow trees draped their branches over the water's edge. Water lilies floated on the surface, their white and pink flowers opening to the sun and closing at dusk like praying hands. Dragonflies stitched invisible patterns through the air, and at the far edge of the pond, the water spilled over a small dam and continued on its journey downstream, toward the river, toward the sea, toward wherever water goes when it leaves us. It was early autumn when our story truly begins, though in truth it had been beginning for a long time, the way all important things begin slowly, accumulating meaning drop by drop like water filling a vessel. The morning was cool and soft, wrapped in mist that hadn't yet decided whether to become rain or simply fade away into nothing.
Thomas walked through his garden as he did every morning, checking on his plants, speaking quietly to them as old friends, noting what needed attention and what simply needed time. He carried his tools in an ancient wooden basket, pruning shears worn smooth by decades of use, a trowel with a handle he'd repaired countless times, twine made from natural fibers, and tucked in the corner something that didn't quite belong, a small book of origami instructions and a stack of colorful paper, slightly water-stained but carefully preserved. Thomas moved through the garden with the unhurried grace of someone who understood that rushing accomplished nothing. He paused at the tomato plants, their fruit heavy and red, pulling warmth from the last of summer's generosity. He picked a few that were perfectly ripe, their skins still cool with morning dew, and placed them gently in his basket. The bean teepees stood like small green temples, their vines spiraling upward in that perfect mathematical pattern that plants somehow know without being taught. Thomas smiled, running his hand along a leaf, feeling its texture, alive, drinking light, breathing out oxygen, participating in the ancient conversation between earth and sky. He moved to the herb spiral, a raised bed built in a coil that created different microclimates, the top warm and dry for Mediterranean herbs, the bottom cool and moist for shade lovers. Rosemary and thyme at the summit, basil and parsley halfway down, mint and cheryl at the base where the soil stayed damp. Thomas pinched a sprig of rosemary, releasing its sharp, clean scent into the air. He held it to his nose, breathing deeply, letting the fragrance clear something in his chest he hadn't known was tight. This garden was his life's work, but it was more than that. It was his therapy, his church, his meditation, his prayer. Every plant he tended was a small act of faith, faith that tomorrow would come, that seasons would turn, that care and patience would be rewarded with growth. He had not always been a gardener. Once, long ago, he had been other things, a son, a brother, a husband, a father. But life had taught him what it teaches everyone eventually, that we are all gardeners of loss, tending memories that grow wild if we're not careful, that can choke out everything else if we let them. His daughter, Lily, had loved this garden. She had toddled through these paths as a child, her small hands always reaching for flowers, her laughter bright as birdsong. She had helped him plant seeds, her concentration fierce as she patted soil over them, whispering encouragements that made Thomas's heart squeeze with love so intense it was almost pain. And then, as children do, she had grown up, grown away, grown into her own life in the city far from this quiet village. They spoke sometimes, but the distance between them was more than miles. It was the distance of different worlds, different rhythms, different understandings of what mattered. Thomas tried not to let it hurt. He poured the love he could not express to her into the garden instead. Every flower was for her. Every vegetable was an offering she would never receive. Every careful arrangement was a letter written in living things that she would never read. The pond was his favorite place for this particular kind of sorrow. He came here when the missing got too heavy, when memory pressed too hard, when the silence of the house behind the garden became too loud.
This morning, Thomas sat on his usual bench beside the pond, a weathered wooden seat he'd built himself years ago. The mist was beginning to lift, revealing the water's surface, dark and still, a mirror reflecting the willows and the gradually lightening sky. He pulled the origami book from his basket. It had been Lily's, left behind when she moved away. He'd found it in her old room, marked with her pencil notes, certain pages dog-eared and worn from repeated folding. She had loved making paper creations,
cranes, flowers, boxes, boats. Her room had been full of them once, a colorful flock of paper creatures perched on every surface. Thomas had kept the book, though he'd never been particularly good with his hands for anything beyond gardening. His fingers were thick and clumsy with small, precise work. But lately he'd been trying, teaching himself to fold the same shapes Lily had once mastered. It was a way of being close to her, even across all those miles and years. He selected a piece of blue paper from his stack, the color of summer sky, of forget-me-nots, of the dress Lily had worn on her 6th birthday. He opened the book to the page for a simple boat, one of the first things she'd learned to make. The instructions showed clean, precise folds. Thomas's fingers fumbled with the paper, creating creases that weren't quite straight, corners that didn't perfectly align. He had to unfold and start again twice. But there was something meditative about it, this patient attempt at creation. The world narrowed to just his hands, the paper, the slow emergence of shape from flatness. Fold the rectangle in half. Crease. Fold the top corners down to meet the center. Crease firmly. Fold the bottom edges up. Tuck and fold again. Press the center together and pull the sides apart. Shape the hull. Create the sail. And there it was, lopsided and imperfect, but undeniably a boat. Thomas held it in his palm, this small thing made from his awkward effort and his memory of his daughter's graceful hands doing the same. On impulse, he stood and walked to the water's edge. The pond's surface was perfectly still now, the mist entirely gone, the morning sun beginning to warm the air. He knelt on the damp grass and placed the paper boat gently on the water. It floated. Imperfect, but it floated. Thomas watched as the current, almost imperceptible but persistent, caught the little boat and began to carry it across the pond. It moved slowly, drifting in a wandering line, bobbing slightly when a fish rose beneath it, turning in lazy circles when it caught an eddy. Something loosened in Thomas's chest as he watched. The boat was moving away from him, and he was letting it go. There was something right about that, though he couldn't quite say why, something necessary. The boat drifted toward the far edge of the pond, where the water spilled over the dam in a gentle cascade. Thomas watched, transfixed, as the current pulled the little boat toward the overflow. It teetered on the edge for a moment, balanced between staying and going, and then it tipped over the dam and was carried away downstream, out of sight, continuing its journey without him. He stood there for a long time, listening to the water, feeling something shift inside him, like soil settling after rain. The next morning, Thomas made another boat. This time he chose yellow paper, the color of daffodils, of early spring mornings, of Lily's hair when she was small and the sun caught it just right. His folds were a little straighter this time, his creases more confident. The boat was still imperfect, but less so. He placed it on the water and watched it make the same journey across the pond and over the dam, disappearing into the stream beyond. The third morning he made a green boat, forest green, the color of growing things, of hope that persists even in darkness. He watched it go. The fourth morning, pink. The fifth, white. The sixth, orange, like sunset, like autumn leaves, like the last light of day. It became a ritual, this morning boat-making and releasing. Thomas would do his garden rounds, then sit by the pond with his basket, his origami book, his stack of paper growing slowly thinner. He would choose a color, sometimes deliberately, sometimes letting his hand decide. He would fold, crease, shape, and create. And then he would kneel at the water's edge and set the boat free, watching until it disappeared from sight. He began to notice details he'd missed before. The way the water created tiny whirlpools around the boat, the way certain colors seemed to glow differently in different light, the way dragonflies would sometimes land on the boats, riding them like tiny passengers on a ship, the way the willow's reflection rippled when the boat passed through. Each boat carried something with it. He realized this without quite articulating it. Each one was a small letting go, not of Lily, never of Lily, but of something else. The weight of unexpressed words, the heaviness of distance, the ache of missing, the guilt of not being enough, not doing enough, not finding the right way to bridge the space between them. The boats carried these things away, and each time one disappeared over the dam, Thomas felt a little lighter, a little more at peace, a little more able to simply be here, now, in this garden, with his work and his solitude and the quiet beauty that surrounded him. Villagers began to notice. Old Mrs. Chen, who walked past the garden each morning on her way to the bakery, paused to watch. Young Miguel, delivering newspapers, stopped to see the morning boat's departure. Children pressed their faces to the garden fence, whispering to each other about the paper boat man. Thomas didn't mind their watching. He wasn't doing it for them, but he wasn't hiding it either. It was simply what he did now, one more part of his routine, like watering the lettuce or checking the compost. Make a boat, release it, watch it go, feel something shift. Autumn deepened. The air grew cooler. The garden began its slow preparation for winter. Tomato plants finishing their last fruit, bean vines yellowing, flowers going to seed. Thomas harvested and pruned, mulched and prepared, helping the garden transition, tucking it in for its long sleep. One morning, rain arrived. Not a storm, but a gentle, persistent rain that settled in for the day, the kind of rain that makes everything soft-edged and quiet, that turns the world into watercolor, that invites you to stay inside with tea and warm blankets. But Thomas went to the garden anyway. He always did. The garden needed him in all weather, and honestly, he needed it too. He pulled on his waxed canvas coat, so old and worn it had molded to his shape, and his rubber boots, and his wide-brimmed hat that kept the rain from his eyes, but let it drum a gentle rhythm on his head. The garden in rain was a different place. The greens were greener, saturated and vivid. The air was full of petrichor, that sacred scent of rain on earth, of water reuniting with soil, of the world washing itself clean. The sound was everywhere, on leaves, on the roof of the small greenhouse, on the surface of the pond, creating a million tiny circles that overlapped and disappeared and formed again. Thomas made his rounds more slowly, savoring the particular quiet that rain creates, not silence, but a soft susurration that somehow makes space for thought. He checked that young plants weren't being battered, that the water was draining properly, that everything was weathering the rain well. When he reached the pond, he sat on his bench despite the wet. The rain was warm for autumn, and he didn't mind it. He pulled his origami book from his basket. He'd wrapped it in waxed cloth to protect it, and selected paper. Today felt like a day for blue, deep blue, the color of twilight, of deep water, of sadness that has become something gentler with time. His hands were damp, which made the folding more difficult. The paper wanted to stick to his fingers, to tear at the creases. He worked more slowly, more carefully, aware that this boat might not even survive the crossing of the pond, let alone the journey beyond. But that was all right. That was part of it, maybe, understanding that fragility and beauty often go together, that things don't have to last forever to matter, that the journey is the point, not the destination. He finished the boat, perhaps his best yet, despite the challenging conditions. He knelt at the water's edge, rain running down his face, soaking through his coat at the knees. He placed the boat on the water and watched. The rain created so much movement on the pond's surface that the boat was tossed and turned, buffeted by 1,000 tiny impacts, but it stayed afloat, riding the chaos with surprising grace, moving faster than usual towards the dam, as if the rain was urging it onward, encouraging it to complete its journey quickly. Thomas watched until it disappeared, and then he stayed there a little longer, kneeling in the rain, feeling the water soak through his clothes, feeling cold but not uncomfortably so, feeling alive in a way he'd almost forgotten was possible. He understood something then, though he couldn't quite put it into words. Something about acceptance, about releasing control, about trust. The boats taught him this, that you could make something with care and love, and then let it go on its own journey, trusting that wherever it ended up was exactly where it needed to be.
The next week brought a visitor to the garden. Thomas was pruning the rose bushes, a delicate task requiring both boldness and restraint, knowing which canes to cut and which to keep, when he heard footsteps on the gravel path. He looked up to see a young woman standing at the edge of his work area. She wore city clothes that looked out of place in the garden: clean jeans, a fashionable jacket, expensive shoes not meant for mud. But her face was kind, curious, with eyes that suggested she was looking for something. "Mr. Thomas?" she asked hesitantly. He nodded, setting down his pruning shears and straightening slowly. His back always protested after bending too long. "I'm Sarah. I'm writing an article for the regional paper about local traditions, interesting stories, that sort of thing. Several people in the village mentioned you and your paper boats?" She said it like a question, as if unsure whether she'd gotten the story right. Thomas felt a flutter of something like embarrassment. He'd never thought of his morning ritual as something worthy of attention, certainly not an article. But Sarah's expression was earnest, not mocking. "Would you mind telling me about them? Why you make them? How it started?" Thomas was quiet for a moment, considering. He'd never told anyone the full story. It was private, a conversation between himself and the water, himself and memory. But looking at Sarah's open face, her genuine interest, he found himself wanting to try. "Would you like tea first?" he asked. They sat in the small shelter Thomas had built near the pond, a simple roof on posts, open on all sides, with a bench and a small table. He boiled water on a camping stove and made tea in 2 chipped ceramic cups that had belonged to his wife. The tea was herbal, made from plants he grew himself: chamomile, mint, lemon balm. It steamed gently in the cool air. "My daughter used to make origami," Thomas began, wrapping his earth-stained hands around his cup. "Cranes, flowers, boats. She was very good at it, better than I'll ever be." Sarah nodded, listening in that rare way that some people have, fully present, not just waiting to speak. "She's grown now, lives in the city. We don't—" He paused, searching for words. "We don't talk much. Different lives, different worlds. I think I disappointed her somehow. Stayed too small, too quiet. Didn't want enough." "Or maybe you wanted different things," Sarah offered gently. Thomas considered this. "Yes, maybe that." "And the boats?" "I found her old origami book. Started learning. It's harder than it looks, making something beautiful from just paper and folds. But I kept trying, and one morning I made a boat and put it in the water, just to see if it would float." He gestured toward the pond. "It did. And then the current carried it away, over the dam, out of sight. And I felt lighter, like the boat had taken something heavy with it." "What did it take?" Thomas was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was softer. "The weight of holding on too tight, of trying to keep things that need to leave, of loving someone so much it becomes a burden for both of you." Sarah wrote nothing, though her notebook lay open on her lap. She just listened, sipping her tea. "So I make one every morning," Thomas continued. "I fold it with care, I set it on the water, and I watch it go. Each one carries something: a memory, a regret,
a wish, a piece of love that's grown too heavy to carry. The water takes it on to wherever water goes, and I stay here in the garden with my work." "Does it help?" Sarah asked. "Yes," Thomas said simply. "I still miss her, but the missing doesn't hurt the same way. It's become something gentler, something I can live with." They sat in companionable silence, drinking their tea, listening to the water and the birds and the whisper of wind through the willows. 3 weeks later, Sarah's article appeared in the regional newspaper. Thomas didn't subscribe, he had little use for news of the wider world, but Mrs. Chen brought him a copy, her face bright with excitement. "You're famous," she said, thrusting the paper at him. Famous was an exaggeration, but there it was, a full-page article with the headline, "The Gardener and the Paper Boat, One Man's Daily Ritual of Letting Go." Sarah had captured their conversation beautifully, with sensitivity and respect. She'd included the practical details, the origami, the pond, the routine, but also the emotional truth underneath. Thomas read it slowly, standing in his garden, and felt something like recognition. She'd understood. She'd seen what he'd been doing, perhaps more clearly than he'd seen it himself. The article concluded, "In a world that tells us to hold on, to achieve, to accumulate, Thomas's daily practice offers a different wisdom, that there is profound peace in letting go, in releasing, in trusting that what we love can survive without our grip. Every morning, by a quiet pond in a forgotten village, one man makes a boat and sets it free, and every morning he becomes a little freer himself." Thomas folded the paper carefully and tucked it in his pocket. He made his rounds of the garden, and then, as always, he sat by the pond with his basket and his book and his paper. Today he chose white, the color of new pages, of fresh starts, of snow that covers old paths and creates space for new ones to be made. He folded carefully, his fingers knowing the way now, the movements almost meditative in their familiarity. Fold, crease, shape, create. The boat emerged, nearly perfect, his best work yet. He was about to place it on the water when his phone rang, a rare occurrence. The garden had cell service barely, and Thomas kept his phone mostly for emergencies. He almost didn't answer, but something made him look at the screen. Lily, his daughter, was calling. His heart hammered as he answered, suddenly nervous. They'd spoken maybe 3 times this year, brief conversations full of pleasantries and the unspoken weight of everything left unsaid. "Hi, Dad." Her voice sounded tentative, younger than her years. "Lily? Hello. Is everything all right?" "Yes, everything's fine. I read the article about you and the boats." Thomas's throat tightened. "Oh. A friend sent it to me. She knows I'm from that area, and when I saw your name, She paused. "Dad, I didn't know. I didn't know you'd kept my origami book. I didn't know you'd been learning. I didn't know—" "Didn't know what, honey?" "That you missed me that much." Her voice broke slightly. "That you thought about me every day. I thought you were fine here without me. That you didn't really need me or want me around. That the garden was enough for you." "Oh, Lily." Thomas sat down heavily on his bench, the white paper boat still in his hand. "Of course I miss you, every day. You're my daughter, my light. You were named for my favorite flower." "I know, I remember." She's crying now, he could hear it. "I'm sorry I haven't visited. I'm sorry I stayed away. I thought it was what you wanted, for me to make my own life, to not need you anymore." "I did want that," Thomas said carefully. "I wanted you to have your life, your freedom, but I never wanted you to think I didn't miss you, that I didn't—" He stopped, struggling with words that had been locked away too long. "That I didn't love you more than anything in this world." They were both quiet, the phone line carrying the sound of 2 people breathing, crying, trying to find their way back to each other across distance and time and misunderstanding. "Can I come visit? Soon? Maybe this weekend?" "Yes," Thomas said, his voice rough with emotion. Yes, please. I'd love that. Dad? Yes? Keep making the boats. Don't stop. I think it's beautiful. After they hung up, Thomas sat for a long time holding the white paper boat, tears running freely down his weathered face. The garden was very quiet, as if it held its breath, as if the plants and trees and water all understood the significance of this moment. Finally, he stood and walked to the water's edge. He knelt, and with shaking hands, he placed the white boat on the pond's surface. This one, he realized, wasn't carrying loss. It was carrying hope.
That weekend arrived dressed in perfect autumn weather. Cool mornings giving way to warm afternoons, the air crisp and clear, the sky that deep blue that only comes in October. Thomas woke before dawn, unable to sleep, nervous and excited in equal measure. He cleaned the house, something he rarely bothered with, living alone and spending most of his time outside. He changed the sheets in Lily's old room, which he'd kept exactly as she'd left it, a shrine to the girl she'd been. He picked flowers from the garden and arranged them awkwardly in vases. He baked bread, filling the house with the warm scent of yeast and comfort. Lily arrived mid-morning, driving up the long gravel drive in a car that looked too expensive and too clean for this quiet village. Thomas waited by the garden gate, wiping his hands nervously on his pants, suddenly aware of how old he must look, how worn by weather and time. But when she stepped out of the car and smiled, that same smile, the one he'd carried in his heart all these years, the nervousness melted away. She ran to him, actually ran, and threw her arms around him. She was taller than he remembered, stronger, but she fit against him the same way she had as a child. "Hi, Dad," she whispered into his shoulder. "Welcome home," he whispered back. They walked through the garden together, and Thomas showed her everything, new additions since her last visit years ago, old favorites she remembered, the rhythm and flow of the space he'd poured his life into. Lily touched plants gently, reverently, as if reconnecting with old friends. She laughed at Thomas's jokes about stubborn tomatoes and gossiping herbs. She admired the efficiency of his composting system and the clever way he'd trained the grapevines. And then they came to the pond. "This is where you make them," Lily said softly, "the boats." "Yes," Thomas gestured to his bench, his basket, his carefully protected book, her book. "Every morning." Lily picked up the book, running her fingers over the worn cover. "I loved this book. I'd forgotten. I made hundreds of things from these patterns." She opened it to the boat page, marked with Thomas's attempts, pencil notes in his handwriting, beside her childhood scrawls. "You're getting better," she said, smiling. "Your folds are almost as good as mine were." "Almost," Thomas agreed, smiling back. "Can we make one together, now? Can you show me your ritual?" So they sat side by side on the bench, father and daughter, and Lily selected paper, purple, her favorite color, the color of lilacs and twilight, and the dress she'd worn to her high school graduation. They folded together, her hands remembering the patterns, his hands following her lead, both of them creating the same shape at the same time. Two boats emerged, hers perfect, his imperfect, but improving. They walked to the water's edge together and knelt in the damp grass. "What do I put in it? What does it carry?" "Whatever you need it to, whatever is too heavy, whatever needs to be released." Lily was quiet, holding her purple boat, considering. I think mine carries guilt, for staying away, for thinking you didn't need me, for not understanding that love doesn't have to look a certain way to be real." "And mine," said Thomas, holding his own purple boat, "carries the years I spent thinking I wasn't enough, that I'd failed you by being simple, by wanting only this garden and this quiet life." They placed their boats on the water together, watching them float side by side. The current caught them gently, carrying them across the pond in tandem, two small purple vessels making the same journey, together but separate, connected but free. They watched until the boats reached the dam, tipped over together, and disappeared from sight. "Where do they go after the dam?" asked Lily. "The stream joins the river about a mile from here, and the river eventually reaches the sea, so I imagine they float all the way there, unless they sink or get caught on something. But I like to think they make it, that somewhere all my boats are floating in the ocean, still carrying what I gave them, still doing their work." "That's beautiful, Dad." They walked back through the garden, and Lily told him about her life in the city, her job, her friends, the small apartment with a single window box where she tried to grow herbs with limited success. Thomas listened, really listened, not comparing or judging, just learning about the life his daughter had built. "Would you teach me?" Lily asked as they sat for lunch, bread and cheese and tomatoes from the garden, the simplest meal made perfect by the fact of sharing it. "The garden things? Not to take over or anything. Just, I want to understand this part of you. I want to know what you know." "I'd love that," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion.
Lily stayed for 3 days, and they were full of work and laughter, quiet moments and deep conversations, teaching and learning that flowed both directions. Thomas showed her how to read the garden's signals, which plants were thriving and which needed attention, how soil should feel and smell, when to water and when to wait. He taught her about companion planting, about the relationships between plants that humans had observed and nurtured for thousands of years. He showed her his composting system, explaining the alchemy of decay and renewal. Lily helped with harvesting, her city-soft hands working alongside his weathered ones, pulling carrots from the earth, picking the last tomatoes before frost could take them, cutting herbs to dry for winter. She asked questions constantly, and Thomas answered patiently, grateful for her curiosity, grateful to share knowledge he'd assumed would die with him. "Why did you become a gardener?" she asked on the second day, as they worked side by side, weeding the perennial beds. Thomas was quiet for a while, his hands moving automatically, pulling weeds and setting them aside for the compost. "After your mother died," he said finally, "and after you left for college, I felt untethered, like I didn't know who I was anymore. Not a husband, not really a father with you gone, just alone." He paused, running soil through his fingers. "The garden was the only thing that made sense. Plants don't lie. They respond to care with growth, to neglect with decline. The relationship is honest, clear, and there's comfort in that clarity, in knowing that if I do my part, the garden will do its part. We're partners." Lily nodded, pulling a stubborn dandelion root. "I think I needed to leave because I was afraid of that." "Afraid of what?" "Of being like you, of being content with small things, of not wanting more, bigger, better. The world tells you that's failure, you know, to be satisfied with a quiet life, to not chase success or recognition or, I don't know, something more." "And now?" asked Thomas gently. "Now I think maybe the world is wrong, or at least not entirely right. I'm successful by their measures, good job, nice apartment, climbing the ladder, but I'm exhausted all the time. I don't sleep well. I can't remember the last time I felt truly peaceful." She looked around the garden. "Like this, like here." Thomas reached over and squeezed her hand, leaving a bit of soil on her fingers. "There's no one right way to live, Lily. Some people need the city, the challenge, the stimulation, and that's beautiful. But some of us need this, earth and growing things and quiet rhythms. Neither is better, neither is worse. They're just different." "Can I have both?" she asked, and there was something vulnerable in her voice, something young. "Can I keep my life, but also have this? Have you?" "Yes," Thomas said firmly. "Yes, you can. We just have to try harder, visit more, call more,
Maybe I could even visit you sometime, see your world." "You in the city? You'd hate it." "Probably," Thomas admitted with a smile, "but I'd love seeing where you live, meeting your friends, understanding your life. Even if I hate the noise and the crowds, I'd love it because it's yours." Every morning of those 3 days, they made boats together. Different colors, different sizes, different things carried away on the water. Lily's boats carried stress from work, anxiety about the future, the constant pressure to be more and do more. Thomas's boats carried loneliness, the fear that he'd failed as a father, the regret of years spent not reaching out because he didn't want to be a burden. They watched each boat make its journey across the pond and over the dam, disappearing into the stream beyond. And with each release, something shifted, something healed. Not completely. Healing is never complete, never finished, but enough to begin again, enough to build something new on the foundation of what had been broken.
On the last morning, Lily woke early, earlier even than Thomas, which surprised him. He found her already at the pond, sitting on his bench, wrapped in a blanket against the cool dawn air, just watching the water. He sat beside her silently, and they watched the sun rise together. The sky transformed slowly, from black to deep blue to purple to pink to gold. The pond's surface caught and reflected each color change, becoming a canvas for the day's beginning. "I don't want to leave," Lily said quietly. "I know, but you have your life, your work. That's good. That's right." "I'll come back," she promised. "More often. Once a month, maybe, if that's okay." "More than okay," Thomas said. "Perfect. And you'll call me? Actually call, not just text back when I text you?" "I'll try," Thomas said. "I'm not good with phones, but I'll try." Lily leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat like that as the garden woke up around them. Birds began their morning songs. The breeze picked up, carrying the scent of late-blooming flowers. The world turned toward day. "Will you make a boat with me?" Lily asked. "One more, before I go?" They chose their papers together. Lily selected rose gold. Thomas chose sage green. They folded in comfortable silence, their hands working in parallel, creating shapes that were similar but not identical, each bearing the marks of its maker's personality and skill. When both boats were finished, they walked to the water's edge one final time. "What does yours carry?" Thomas asked. Lily thought for a moment. "Hope," she said. "Hope that we'll be okay, that we found our way back to each other, that distance doesn't have to mean disconnection." "And mine," Thomas said, "carries gratitude for you coming here, for giving me another chance, for understanding that love doesn't always know how to express itself, but it's there, always there, even when we can't find the words." They placed their boats on the water together, and this time, when the current caught them, Lily slipped her hand into Thomas's. They stood there, fingers intertwined, watching their boats make the journey across the pond. The boats moved at slightly different speeds. Lily's rose gold boat a bit faster, Thomas's sage green one taking its time. They crossed the pond on converging paths, coming together near the middle, bumping gently against each other before continuing on, side by side now, toward the dam. "Look," Lily whispered, "they found each other." Thomas squeezed her hand, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. The boats reached the dam together and tipped over the edge at the same moment, disappearing from view, continuing their journey somewhere beyond sight, but together. After Lily's car disappeared down the driveway, Thomas stood at the gate for a long time, feeling the emptiness of her departure, but also the fullness of her presence still lingering in the air. The garden felt different now, not lonely,
but peaceful, not abandoned, but tended by love that existed even in absence. He made his rounds, touching plants that Lily had touched, walking paths they'd walked together, seeing his familiar garden through new eyes, her eyes, which had found it beautiful, which had seen value in what he did here, which had understood. Autumn deepened into winter. The garden slowly went dormant, preparing for its long rest. Thomas mulched beds, cut back perennials, protected tender plants, and helped the garden settle into sleep. The pond grew cold, sometimes forming a thin skin of ice that the morning sun would melt away. But every morning Thomas still made his boats, even in the coldest weather, even when snow fell softly on the water, even when his fingers went numb with cold. The ritual had become essential, a meditation that grounded him, that connected him to Lily across the miles, that reminded him daily of the practice of letting go. Lily called every week, sometimes more. They spoke about small things, her work projects, his garden plans for spring, a book she was reading, a recipe he'd tried. But underneath the small talk was something larger, connection being rebuilt, relationship being tended like a garden, care being expressed in the consistent showing up. She visited once in December, bringing city friends who exclaimed over the winter garden's stark beauty, who were charmed by the village, who understood why Lily spoke of this place with such affection. She came again in January for Thomas's birthday, bringing a gift, new origami paper in colors he'd never seen, metallic and iridescent, shimmering like fish scales. Winter gradually gave way to spring. The garden woke slowly, reluctantly at first, then with increasing enthusiasm. Bulbs pushed through cold soil, buds swelled on branches, the air warmed, and the quality of light changed, becoming gentler, more golden. Thomas prepared beds for planting, turned compost, started seeds in the greenhouse, and every morning he made his boat. By now his folds were assured, confident. His boats were nearly perfect, each one a small work of art, but he'd learned that perfection wasn't the point. Presence was, intention was, the ritual itself was what mattered. The villagers had fully incorporated his morning boat-making into the rhythm of their own lives. Children asked their parents, "Can we watch Mr. Thomas's boat today?" Elderly residents timed their morning walks to coincide with the boat's departure. Young couples stood at the fence, arms around each other, finding something romantic in the daily gesture of release. Thomas didn't mind. The ritual had started as something private, but it had become something else, a small piece of public art, a daily reminder to everyone who witnessed it that letting go was possible, that grief could become grace, that distance could coexist with love. One morning in late April, when the garden was explosively green and the air was full of flowering scents, Thomas made a boat from the iridescent paper Lily had given him. It shimmered in the morning light, catching and reflecting colors that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. He placed it on the water, and a strange thing happened. As the boat drifted across the pond, fish rose to the surface beneath it, drawn by the shimmering reflection, thinking perhaps it was something edible, or simply fascinated by the moving light. They created a procession, an honor guard of sorts, escorting the boat across the water. Children at the fence gasped and pointed. Mrs. Chen stopped her walk to watch. Even the birds seemed to pause in their morning business to observe this unusual crossing. The boat reached the dam, and as it tipped over the edge, a swallow swooped down and plucked something from the water, not the boat itself, but something near it. Then the bird flew up, 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 carrying whatever it had found toward its nest in the eaves of Thomas's greenhouse. Thomas smiled. The boats didn't just carry his releases away. They fed the ecosystem, contributed to the cycle, became part of the web of life in ways he'd never considered. Paper would eventually break down, feeding microorganisms, becoming part of the soil, part of the water, part of the world again. Nothing was ever truly lost. Everything transformed.
Summer arrived with its usual exuberance. The garden reached its peak, vegetables ripening daily, flowers in constant bloom, the air thick with warmth and fragrance. Thomas worked long days, harvesting, watering, tending, preserving. His kitchen filled with jars of jam and pickles and dried herbs, preparing for the winter that would inevitably come again. Lily called one evening in July with an idea. "Dad, what if we did something? At the garden, a gathering of some sort. I could come, bring friends, you could invite villagers. We could make boats together, everyone. Share the ritual. What do you think?" Thomas's first instinct was to say no. The boats were personal, private, sacred. But then he remembered how the ritual had changed when Lily joined it, how sharing it with her had deepened rather than diminished its meaning. "All right," he said. "Yes, let's do that." They planned it for the first Saturday in August, a date when summer felt most like itself, most abundant and generous. Thomas prepared the garden, not changing anything, but simply ensuring it was at its best. Lily managed the logistics, invitations, supplies, food. The day arrived perfect and clear. People began gathering in mid-afternoon. Villagers Thomas had known for years, some of Lily's friends from the city, even Sarah, the journalist who'd written the original article, bringing her own family. Thomas found himself surprisingly calm, watching people explore his garden, exclaim over the vegetables, smell the flowers, dip their fingers in the pond. Children ran on the paths, their laughter bright and wild. Adults spoke in quiet voices, respecting the space's inherent tranquility. As evening approached, everyone gathered by the pond. Thomas had set out tables with origami paper in every color imaginable, instruction sheets, examples to follow. Lily stood beside him, and together they explained the practice, the folding, the intention, the release. "The boat can carry anything," Thomas said, his voice soft but carrying in the quiet. "Whatever feels too heavy, whatever you need to let go of. Or it can carry hope, dreams, love, anything you want to send out into the world. There's no wrong way to do this." People began folding. Some worked alone, concentrated and serious. Some worked in pairs or groups, helping each other with tricky folds, laughing at mistakes. Children made wild, creative boats that barely resembled the instructions. Elders made careful, precise boats, their hands remembering skills from long ago. Thomas and Lily moved through the crowd, offering help, answering questions, admiring boats in all their variety. The tables became covered with paper creations, hundreds of boats in every color, each one unique, each one carrying its maker's intention. When everyone was finished, they lined up along the pond's edge, a crowd of people, all ages, all backgrounds, united in this simple, strange, beautiful ritual. Thomas stood at the front with Lily beside him, holding their own boats. "On 3, Lily said, smiling. 1, 2, 3. At once, hundreds of boats were placed on the water. The pond's surface became a rainbow, a floating garden of color and intention. The current caught them, and they began their journey, some fast, some slow, some in groups, some alone, all heading toward the dam, toward the stream beyond, toward their unknown destinations. The crowd watched in silence, broken only by occasional whispers of wonder from children, soft gasps from adults. The boats drifted and bobbed, bumped and separated, created patterns that formed and dissolved and formed again. And slowly, boat by boat, they reached the dam and tipped over, disappearing from view, carrying away their burdens and hopes, their griefs and dreams, their releases and offerings.
When the last boat disappeared, someone began to clap. Then others joined in, until the whole gathering was applauding, not for Thomas, not for Lily, but for the boats themselves, for the water that carried them, for the simple magic of letting go. As twilight settled over the garden, the gathering transformed into a celebration. Lily had arranged for food, simple, abundant, meant for sharing. Long tables were set up under the willow trees, and people filled plates and found seats on benches, on the grass, on the garden's stone walls. Thomas found himself surrounded by people wanting to share their stories. Mrs. Chen told him her boat had carried grief for her husband, gone 5 years now. Grief she'd been holding so tight it had become part of her identity. "I think I can let him rest now," she said quietly. "I think I can remember him with joy instead of just sadness." Young Miguel, the newspaper delivery boy, now a teenager, said his boat carried pressure to succeed, to be perfect, to meet everyone's expectations. "I thought letting go meant giving up, but maybe it just means being easier on myself." Sarah, the journalist, told him her boat carried writer's block, the paralyzing fear that she'd never write anything as good as her best work. "I needed to release that fear to make space for what comes next," she explained. Story after story, release after release. Thomas listened to each one, honored by the trust, moved by the vulnerability. He'd started this practice as something personal, a private conversation with loss, but it had become something larger, a gift he'd accidentally given his community, a ritual that created space for collective healing. As full darkness fell, someone lit candles in jars and hung them from the willow trees. The garden transformed into something magical. Soft golden light, the murmur of conversation, the occasional burst of laughter, the smell of good food and summer flowers. Thomas sat on his bench by the pond, taking a moment of solitude amidst the gathering. Lily found him there, settling beside him with 2 cups of tea. "Happy, Dad?" "Yes," he said simply. "Yes, I am." "Me too." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching their community celebrate in the garden they both loved. "I've been thinking," Lily said, after a while, "about moving back. Not immediately, but maybe in a year or 2. I could work remotely, come to the city when needed. I miss this. I miss you. I miss knowing where I come from." Thomas felt his heart expand, but he kept his voice steady. "Only if it's what you truly want, not because you think I need you here." "I do truly want it," Lily said. "The city was important. I needed to go, to prove I could, to build my own life. But I think I'm ready to come home now, to build a life here too. Both, like you said, not either or, but both." "Then I'd love that," Thomas said, "more than I can say." They sat a while longer, and then Lily said, "I've been thinking about planting something tomorrow before I leave. Something that will grow while I'm gone, that you'll tend, that will be here waiting when I come back. A tree, maybe." "What kind?" "A willow," Lily said immediately, "for flexibility, for the way they bend but don't break, for the way they love water, for the way they create shelter." "A willow," Thomas agreed. "Perfect."
The next morning, after most of the guests had left and the garden was slowly returning to its usual quiet, Thomas and Lily prepared to plant the willow. They'd chosen a spot near the pond, but not too near, where the young tree would have room to grow, where its roots could reach water but not overwhelm the pond's ecosystem. Thomas had taught Lily how to prepare a planting hole, wider than it needed to be, deep enough for the roots, amended with compost and good soil. They worked together, digging in comfortable silence, occasionally stopping to drink water or wipe sweat from their faces. The willow sapling was young, barely 3 feet tall, but healthy,
flexible branches, vibrant leaves, a strong root system visible through its container. Thomas had chosen it carefully from a local nursery, looking for vigor and promise. "Before we plant it," Lily said, "I want to do something." She pulled out a small waterproof container, the kind geocachers use. Inside, she'd placed several things: a photograph of herself and Thomas from yesterday's gathering, a page from her old origami book, a seed packet from the garden, a smooth stone from the pond's edge, and a letter she'd written but sealed so Thomas couldn't read it. "A time capsule," she explained. "We'll bury it with the tree, and someday, maybe when the tree is fully grown, we can dig it up and remember this moment, this new beginning." Thomas nodded, his throat tight with emotion. They placed the container in the bottom of the hole, positioning it carefully. Then they settled the willow on top, spreading its roots, backfilling with soil, tamping it gently, creating a slight well around the trunk to hold water. They watered it together, watching the soil darken and settle. The willow looked small and vulnerable there by the pond, but Thomas knew willows, how fast they grew, how resilient they were, how quickly this small sapling would become a presence, then a landmark, then a shelter. "There," Lily said, stepping back to admire their work. "Now a piece of me is here always, even when I'm not." "You were always here," Thomas said, "even when you were far away. Even during the years we didn't speak, you were here in every part of this garden. Every plant I tended was for you. Every boat I made carried thoughts of you." They made one final boat together before Lily had to leave, a shared creation, folding the same piece of paper together, their hands working in tandem, creating something that neither could have made alone. The boat that emerged was unusual, imperfect, but beautiful in its uniqueness. They placed it on the water together, and as it began its journey across the pond, Thomas said quietly, "Thank you for coming home, even if it was just for a little while. Thank you for waiting, for not giving up, for keeping the door open." The boat drifted across the pond, past the young willow they'd just planted, past the bench where they'd sat and talked and rebuilt their relationship word by word. It reached the dam and tipped over, beginning its journey beyond sight. But this time, Thomas didn't feel the usual sense of loss or release. This time, he felt only connection to Lily, to the water, to the garden, to the earth beneath his feet and the sky above his head. This time, the boat carried not something heavy to be released, but something light and precious to be shared with the world. Love that had survived distance, forgiveness that had healed wounds, hope that tomorrow would be better than yesterday.